And samadhi, we'll see, is a factor, an aid to enlightenment, which occurs in several of these groups. But what distinguishes the four bases is the factor by means of which the practitioner gains that concentration. And so the four factors are mentioned here. One is desire. The Pali word is chanda. Sometimes the word chanda, desire, is used in a negative or unwholesome sense, where it's equivalent to craving or greed. But elsewhere, chanda is used in a positive or affirmative sense as desire for the development of wholesome qualities, desire for the goal, and so on. So, when people say that, some people say, oh, Buddhism tells us to eliminate desire, that means that we have to eliminate desire for the good as well as the bad, and so it just reduces us to being like a vegetable. That was my mother's argument against Buddhism. You say that to get rid of suffering, you have to eliminate desire. When you get rid of desire, you don't have any desire to do what is good as well as what is bad. Therefore, quote erat demonstratum, you become like a vegetable which doesn't have any desire. But actually, the Buddha says to eliminate the unwholesome type of desire, but he encourages the desire for good qualities. In this case, it's the desire for concentration, which doesn't mean that you're always sitting there just thinking, I gotta get concentration, I gotta get samadhi, everybody else has gotten it, I'm the only one who hasn't gotten it. Or if they've gotten one level of concentration, I have to surpass them, so I will be number one. It's not that kind of desire, but one knows that samadhi is the basis for the development of insight or wisdom, and so with that desire guiding the practice, then one uses determined striving in order to strive diligently, and thereby eventually one achieves samadhi or concentration. Okay, the next one uses energy or effort. It seems that there's a subtle difference between desire and energy. Could anybody characterize that difference? Anybody have any way to characterize the difference between desire and energy? Katie? Please take the microphone from the person who has it. And speak loudly. Oh, I see you. No, it was Katie here. She.
There's a sensation. Just after there's desire, a person can harvest just the sensation without the characterization that there's an energetic quality. Same as happiness. A person can have the sensation underlying happiness.
Anybody else have any ideas?
I think of the desire as being kind of a mental thing and the energy and effort being a bodily thing.
Being a bodily thing. I wouldn't say that effort is a bodily thing, because effort, as explained here, is the effort to prevent the arising of unarisen. They're both mental. Anybody else have any idea? And I don't have a fixed, I'm not sort of testing you to see whether you hit the nail on the head. I'm just trying to get people's understanding of a difference. Tracy, back, or I think Sandy had her, did you have your hand up?
I think desire is more like an intention.
Oh, that's very good, yeah.
And then
Okay, that's a good way to put it. The desire involves, like I say, the intentional factor is more prominent. And how did you express the effort?
The effort is like putting the intention into action.
Okay, putting the intention into action. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And then Tracy, you can take this microphone or speak very loudly.
Mind is related to what was just said. I think of desire as will and energy as willingness, availability, or potential. So desire is an intention or a will,
Yeah.
and energy is a willingness, the capacity or potential to fulfill the desire.
Yeah, though maybe the word energy in English suggests something like potential energy, whereas here this is applied energy or effort. Yeah. But what you said about desire being a will, the will, that corresponds closely to the idea of the intention. Yeah. And then I guess effort, you could say, is using determination to accomplish the aim.
Well, for me, willingness and availability is a definite state.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I don't like desire, but if I don't have energy.
Okay, yeah, okay, that's good, yeah. That's something from the internet? Okay, let us see. Okay, could the four bases for spiritual power be successful attainment of the four jhanas and then further development of the supernormal powers? Yeah, well, of course, the four bases for spiritual power are said to be the means for developing concentration, and then on that basis of that concentration, one can develop the supernormal powers. But in the work like the Visuddhimagga, the four bases for spiritual power are mentioned as the special practices that one has to develop after developing the jhanas in order to direct the mental power of the jhanas towards developing these supernormal powers. But what puzzles me is amongst these 37 aids to enlightenment, one doesn't see anything else sort of leaning towards the supernormal powers, but it all seems like a pretty straight recipe or set of instructions for insight and wisdom. But here it seems a little bit going off on a tangent. Okay, let's try to go through the rest of them. Okay, the third one is the basis for spiritual power consisting in concentration due to, it was Nyanamoli who added purity of, but the text just has citta, mind. So concentration due to mind and determined striving. Again, this is a little unclear to me. Where does mind as such differ from desire, which is sort of the intentional application of mind, and energy, which is, or effort, which is, again, its mental application? The way I would understand it, and this is just by purely personal interpretation, that instead of sort of fixing the mind in a determined direction, the way one does with effort and with desire, when the mind, through the development of meditation, becomes sort of bright and luminous and at ease or relaxed, softens, one sinks into that luminosity and softness of the mind and lets that luminosity and softness and tranquilization of the mind unfold by itself without having to fix the mind and empower the mind in a particular way. But just one lets, it's a kind of letting go of effort after one reaches a certain point, and as one lets go of effort, the mind sort of spontaneously, through the empowerment one has already given it, expands and develops and unfolds into the state of samadhi. Does anybody else have any thoughts about that? Apparently Venerable Nyanamoli did. Well, he, by adding the, in brackets, the expression purity of mind, which actually seems close to what I said. As the mind becomes purified, you could say, one just keeps all the impure factors or defiling factors away and just lets that purity become stronger and more potent on its own. Okay, then the fourth basis for spiritual power is concentration due to, wow, this is a basis for spiritual power consisting in desire, energy. Kaidi, you've just been applauded for you have to now just turn around and display your supernormal powers. Is that Kaidi up on the ceiling, flying around there? Okay, so the fourth is the concentration due to investigation. And the word that's used here is vimangsa. So this is usually used in relation to the development of wisdom. So it seems that this would be the kind of concentration that, though it's not said explicitly, but this is the way I would interpret, the concentration that develops through the practice of insight meditation. As one is investigating and examining things, then the mind becomes increasingly concentrated. And then if one wants to use that concentration, instead of strengthening insight further, one could let the investigation of insight sort of one could put it aside and just let the concentration on its own deepen. So one uses investigation or insight to develop concentration, and then one puts the insight aside and strengthens the concentration until it will bring, deeper states of samadhi. Okay, so these are the four bases for spiritual power. Any questions about these? Okay, now we move into the five faculties, the five spiritual faculties. I'm a little afraid to write on this board now because it seems that these types of ink will stick to the board. I don't want anybody to go through work. But these are called in Pali the five indriyas, I-N-D-R-I-Y-A. And the word indriya is derived from the name of one of the Vedic deities, Indra, who is considered in some of the Vedas the ruler of the gods. So just as Indra exercises rulership over the other deities, so these five faculties, each in their own way, exercise rulership or domination in a particular way of cultivating the mind. So we have five spiritual faculties here. They're set out in this formula that the monk develops the faculty of faith, which leads to peace, leads to enlightenment. He develops the faculty of energy, the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of concentration, the faculty of wisdom, which leads to peace, leads to enlightenment. And thereby many disciples reach the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. Okay, here I would say that I see a definite pattern of development. Okay, one begins with faith, or in the Pali word saddha, which doesn't mean like blindly believing certain doctrines, but it means that one begins with a kind of trust in the basic, basic principles of the Buddha's teaching and with the course of training or practice. So the basic principles or framework would be like the Four Noble Truths, the three marks of existence, and the basic practice would be the development of virtuous conduct, concentration, wisdom, and so on. Okay, so with that faith or trust, one enters the practice, and then the practice consists primarily in the initial stages in the interplay of energy and mindfulness. We could say that one applies effort in cultivating the four foundations of mindfulness. So you could see here we have, with the faculty of energy, which is explained elsewhere as the four kinds of right striving, and the faculty of mindfulness is explained as the four foundations of mindfulness. So one uses energy or effort to cultivate the four foundations of mindfulness. So these are like two hands which are washing one another, effort and mindfulness. Then as one develops energy and mindfulness together, out of that interplay, there emerges, the mind becomes settled, focused, tranquil. So concentration or samadhi emerges. So this is the faculty of concentration. And then when concentration is sufficiently developed, one brings together the faculties of energy, mindfulness, and concentration in order to develop insight. And so it's now mindfulness is applied in a different way, not just to develop concentration, but in order to discern the nature of things more precisely. And so that will bring insight, and what exercises insight is the faculty of wisdom. Sometimes in the commentaries it's said that the five faculties can be divided. Let's say we take the five faculties and we see that there are two pairs amongst these five which have to be balanced. One is faith and wisdom, that one has to balance faith and wisdom. Since if one has faith without wisdom, then one would be inclined just to blind belief or just to simple credulity. Or one could incline towards a kind of dogmatism. Oh, one accepts the teaching out of faith, and then one argues, oh, the Buddha's three characteristics, those are the greatest, the most wonderful. That's the dependent origination that can knock away all the other teachings. I mean, I've seen Buddhists like this who always are proudly extolling the principles of the Buddha's teaching, but they never get around to seriously practicing it. So that's due to an excess of faith. Then if one has excess of wisdom but not enough faith, one could use the teaching as a kind of intellectual toy, for playing games of refutation, argumentation, working out, finding different ways to systematize the teaching. But because one lacks, deep within, one lacks sufficient faith, again, one doesn't take up the actual practice. So too much faith without wisdom leads to dogmatism and blind credulity. And too much wisdom, well, it's not real wisdom, but let's say intellectual understanding without faith can lead to intellectual cleverness without experience, without realization through practice. But when faith and wisdom, faith and intelligence are balanced, then one could practice in a way that will bring true wisdom. Okay, then the other two faculties that have to be put into balance, held in balance, are energy and concentration. If there's an excess of energy without enough calmness in the mind, then the mind becomes restless and agitated. And this will lead to which of the 5 hindrances?
Restlessness.
Yeah, restlessness and remorse. So this is energy which is not properly applied. Sometimes one is too eager to obtain things in practice, and so one tries very, very diligently, but without applying that energy properly, one applies energy in what I would call a hard or driving mode, not using sufficient softness and gentleness in the application of energy. And then if there's too much, they say too much concentration or stillness without enough energy, then what happens? Speak up. Yeah, there can be dullness, the mind becomes dull and drowsy. This isn't really samadhi, but it's a kind of sometimes a false samadhi. Somebody gets really drowsy, then they sometimes blank out for a moment, and then they think that they've reached nirodha samapatti, the attainment of cessation, or even that they've experienced sotapatti, stream entry. So that's too much like stillness and softness of the mind without the drive of energy or effort. But when you keep energy and effort balanced, when you keep energy and concentration balanced, then you get the true concentration. Okay, then what happens to mindfulness in this fivefold scheme? Nothing to balance out mindfulness. Yeah, I can't hear without... Where is that, the microphone? You Okay, she said mindfulness supports the other faculties. Yeah, mindfulness is said to be that faculty which sort of regulates the interrelationship of the other faculties to ensure that there's a balance between them. Okay, now we move on to the 5 powers. So the 5 powers, we'll see, these are called bala, B-A-L-A. The 5 powers correspond exactly to the 5 faculties. So I have proclaimed to my disciples the way to develop the 5 powers. Here a monk develops the power of faith, which leads to enlightenment, the power of energy, power of mindfulness, power of concentration, power of wisdom, which leads to peace, leads to enlightenment. So the question comes up, what is the relationship between the faculties and the powers? And here there is some difference of opinion. Different interpreters have different opinions. Some say, I think this is the commentarial position, based on the Abhidhamma, that the faculties and powers are really the same states, just viewed from a different perspective. The 5 faculties are these 5 qualities viewed from the perspective of exercising rulership in their own departments, so to speak, in the unfolding of the path to enlightenment. So maybe these, you could say, are like 5 cabinet members or 5 ministers of state. We have the Minister of Defense, Minister of Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of, is there Commerce, Department of Commerce, Secretary of, what is another one? Excuse me? Secretary of Labor, okay. So they're at a conference, each has their own, specific sphere of authority, but they have to pool their insights, their skills, their capacities, their experience together in order to see that the country is governed successfully, so it becomes a prosperous, peaceful, equitable country. The 5 powers are basically the same 5 ministers, but it's said that the power has the sense that it's something that cannot be shaken by its opposite. So faith cannot be shaken by skepticism or doubt. Energy cannot be shaken by laziness or by laziness. Mindfulness cannot be shaken by forgetfulness or this mental muddle-mindedness. Concentration cannot be shaken by distracting thoughts, and wisdom cannot be shaken by stupidity or ignorance. So maybe this would be like the 5 ministers or 5 secretaries in the cabinet that cannot be shaken by troublemakers within the government, or maybe by opponents from the opposite party. So the minister, Secretary of State can't be shaken by, let us say, by members of Congress who have some interest in affairs of state. The Minister of Defense, Secretary of Defense cannot be shaken by the members of the House. They have a military committee, Armed Services Committee. The Secretary of Commerce cannot be shaken by, the committee, corresponding committee from the House. Secretary of Labor can't be shaken by the House Committee on such and such affairs. Secretary of Education, again, can't be shaken by the House Committee on Education. They are trying to make trouble because they belong to opposite parties. But when these secretaries or ministers are secure in their position, they can't be shaken by the opposite party. Okay, so some say that the 5 faculties, 5 powers are the same, just considered from different perspectives. Others say that the 5 faculties are these 5 qualities in the earlier stages of the practice, and then when they build up strength, then they become the 5 powers. I don't have a particular position between one interpretation or the other. Speak.
Do they correspond exactly to the hindrances, or not really?
No. No, I don't think they correspond to the hindrances. You can't say that the faculty of faith is opposed to, well, actually it does go against doubt. Faculty of energy could go against dullness and drowsiness. The faculty of concentration can go against restlessness and worry. Let's see, faculty of wisdom. Let's see, we have aversion and sensual desire. Yeah, I don't see where sensual desire and aversion will be opposed to the other two, by the other two faculties. It would be a rather, there's some correspondence there, but you can't say an exact correspondence. Okay, now we come to the 7 enlightenment factors. These are called bojjhangas. Here we have, angas are factors that lead to bodhi. Bodhi is enlightenment. So when you have bodhi and anga together, that dya sound turns into ja. So bojjhanga. So here the Buddha teaches the 7 enlightenment factors. Okay, here a monk develops the mindfulness enlightenment factor, which is supported by seclusion. Maybe this takes a little more interpretation and explanation. I think I should maybe take these sets next week. And for now, I'll just ask whether we have any questions on anything that's been covered so far. Otherwise, I have to rush through this rather superficially through the enlightenment factors and the Noble Eightfold Path, whereas they require some explanation. Okay. Okay, this is actually a comment. Anapanasati is said to be the one practice that naturally leads to the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and then it leads to the 7 factors of enlightenment, and then this brings nirvana. So the other 37 factors are not given equal prominence. Okay, so, there is a sutta where the Buddha speaks about how one who develops anapanasati through the 16 steps or 16 aspects is developing the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Then the 4 foundations of mindfulness, they focus on mindfulness, which is the first of the 7 factors of enlightenment. So in this way, he is developing the 7 enlightenment factors, and then he reaches liberation. So that is one scheme, and that scheme doesn't mention the other 37 factors of enlightenment, or 37 aids to enlightenment, but it doesn't mean that they're not important or can be dismissed. It's just that the Buddha uses different expositions which give prominence to different factors. Like there's a sutta where the Buddha says, one who practices the 4 foundations of mindfulness as they have been taught here will reach one of 2 goals, either arhatship or the state of a non-returner. So here the Buddha is just expounding the 4 foundations of mindfulness. He doesn't mention the 5 faculties, the 4 right efforts, the 4 bases of spiritual power, the 5 powers. He does mention the 7 enlightenment factors within the 4th foundation of mindfulness, but basically he uses just the 4 foundations of mindfulness leading to the goal. Other places the Buddha will use just the 7 enlightenment factors as leading to the goal. Other places just the 5 faculties as leading to the goal. So different strokes for different folks, as they say. The Buddha just varies the teaching according to the situation or the capacity of those that he's teaching. Okay, then, well, this I think is a continuation of the same question. doesn't mean that I think the other 37 factors are merely details of the primary practice. But there are other practices besides anapanasati. One can't say that anapanasati alone is the practice. There are some suttas which speak about developing the 4 Brahmaviharas and then developing the 7 enlightenment factors on the basis of the Brahmaviharas. Okay, any further questions? Okay, if not, then we'll end for the day here. Maybe we won't have the discussion period today, but rather we'll take the discussion period next week when we complete the sutta. So if you have any further questions, on this section, write them down and bring them next week. Then when we are back in our familiar accommodation, the Guanyin Hall, then we could have the discussion period. Okay, so we'll end the class with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so we share the merits of the meditation session, the session of teaching and listening and discussing the Dhamma. We dedicate the merit to the devas, the fair spirits, the protective spirits, and all sentient beings in the world. Akasata chabumata adeva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata adeva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata Deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagupadaya avichihetato etantare satakayupapana rupya rupicha asanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting. Yeah, I realize that now they're having a retreat program, it's in Mandarin up in the the main hall, the Guanyin hall, and then in the dining hall. So I think for those who want to take the lunch here, it might be necessary to wait until 12. Do you know about this? To wait until 12 noon, because those who take the retreat will go up and they'll take their lunch, I think, from 11:30 to 12. But you can go up and ask. I'm not sure, but that might be the case. Okay, so let us end with the 3 bows, half bows to the Buddha.